Hello, Pearl Jam fan community. Welcome to the Wishlist Foundation's interview series, Candle of Thought, where we illuminate the people, causes, and music that are important to the Pearl Jam community. I am your host, Chrissy Ferguson. Today, I am excited to chat with Pearl Jam's official tour photographer, Geoff Whitman. While Geoff has always been inspired by music and photography, it was an encounter with a music photography legend backstage at a Pearl Jam show that solidified his decision to enter the world of rock photography. And lucky for us, the Pearl Jam fans, Geoff decided to take on this new role with the band because he perfectly captures, through his lens, all of the band's touring moments for us to enjoy. Whether we were in attendance at a specific show that he shot, or we just had a chance to listen to it on Sirius XM's Pearl Jam radio, Geoff always brings to life what we know was a show that we will never forget. So welcome, Geoff. Thank you so much for chatting with me again today.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
So I've always believed that artists live their daily lives thinking and dreaming in their craft. And what I mean by that is, as a writer myself, when I see or experience something that's too good not to share with others, I think there's a story in that. So I was wondering, do you feel like you can see something and automatically think, whether there's a camera in your hand or not, that there's a picture in that? And if so, is there a particular moment in time that you can remember that maybe helped you to discover this about
Mm.
yourself?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I do think in terms of you have very photographic. I have sort of a photographic memory, which I guess is appropriate. But from the time I was a little kid and walking around New York City with my mom, waiting for her gallery shows or whatever to begin, I you see these scenes unfold in front of you. I think I'm probably my second career in this would have been filmmaker, and who knows, I'm not that old yet. You never know, I might be able to do it, but I definitely am very visual in that way, so I'm always watching. And I think the cool thing about the last probably 15 years or so is that there is usually a camera in my hand when I'm walking around, just in regular life. Not a cell phone camera because, as we all know, that's great, but it doesn't take the place of an actual camera and a bit of skill. I wouldn't say a ton of skill, but a bit of skill. So yeah, I can think of. I mean, there's a few times where I think that the scene has sort of unfolded in front of me, and I think, this has got to be a photograph, and that wouldn't be at a show I'm talking about it, just more like in life, or walking around, or you see something, or you see like a string of the flashes of red, and you're like, wow, that's weird that I'm seeing all that red in this scene where none of it really goes together, but red is kind of the theme. um you just become visual, and then I try to teach myself to think in black and white, and to see in black and white, because I love black and white. I think most photographers, it's kind of like a first love, and sometimes it's one you never shake. But when you see things just in black, white, and all the different shades of gray, you kind of know what's going to look good. And it's like, oh man, I have to take a picture of that. Like I just did that when I was here. I'm here in Chicago, and I was with a friend of mine, and just saw like this. It's like a whole. Looks like a scene from the 1950s just played out in front of us, and it just was too cool to not shoot. So
That's awesome.
I had to.
Well,
Yeah,
tell us about that encounter backstage, because I'm pretty sure it was probably Danny Clinch that you were talking to.
yeah, yeah.
So what was that moment, that defining moment, and what did he say to you that really made you feel like, I want to get into rock photography?
Yeah, I mean, I had kind of experimented with rock photography when I was in school. I was at Northeastern in Boston from 89 to 94, and took a ton of photography classes because I was kind of interested in what's the process. And to me, and again in the 90s, and it dates me a little bit, but everything was film. So learning how to develop film and being in a darkroom, it is magic. And so many photographers and so many people talk about that just as being magic. It totally is. It's like gets in your blood and you can't ever really get it out. And then digital came and it was like I resisted it. I'll get to Danny in a minute. He gets a lot of airtime whenever I'm talking. He gets a lot of airtime. But it was one of those things. So I started taking my camera, my little crummy camera, into shows, and taking photos. I think the first band that I actually ever shot was Aerosmith at a show, a warm-up show in Boston. And the photos are, I have them.
Oh, wow.
There's not, nothing to write home about. I won't be putting a book together of those photos anytime soon. But I loved Aerosmith, and growing up in New England, it was like they were a big part of my life because the band kind of came together in New Hampshire, which is where I went to high school. So Danny, yeah, I was at backstage. I want to say it was like 2012 maybe, or 2014. And I had really been like, you talk about like how you dream about your craft. Like I'll sit at night when I'm like trying to fall asleep if I have too much on my mind, and I'm literally thinking about like, I really have to try that lens on that old camera body that I have, because I bet it would be really cool, and it's a vintage lens. And then you start thinking about what that would be like. And so,
Yeah.
it's like I wind myself up doing it. And never mind like making prints or doing that kind of thing, and forget even thinking about shows that are coming up. Like if I start thinking about those 10 or 11 shows, I won't sleep, because I'm thinking about what I can do better. Um, but I was there at a show, and I mean, remember, to me, the thing that's so singular about this experience is that I've been a 10 Club member forever, so it's like I've been a fan from day one. And so for me to see everything unfolding in front of me at shows is bizarre, because for sure I'd be at those shows anyway.
Right.
But now I not only do I get paid to go, which is the dream, right?
Mhm.
But I have unfettered, kind of access to this stuff. And it's like I'm trying to take it, so I remember it also, so we can all see it, right? It's kind
Right.
of like one or the other. But it was at a show, and it was like in the, sort of in the hospitality room. I don't know exactly how I ended up there at that time. I was with a bunch of people, and we kind of came down. I remember I flew down from Northern California to go to this show at the Forum, and I was just watching this guy at the bar, uh, a hip looking dude, glasses and a hat. And like, truth be told, like that's kind of my style anyway. So I'm like, look at this cat, he's like kind of rocking a style that I like too, And I was just standing there, and he's like, hey, how's it going? And I said, hey, how's it going? I had no idea who he was. I had, of course, heard of Danny Clinch, but I don't think I had ever seen his face. I'm representing as always, too, by the
Love
way.
it.
Yeah, yeah. But I said, hey, can I buy you a beer? And he goes, yeah. He goes, beers are free at these things. And it was such a great comment. Like, I'll never forget it. Before I even knew who he was. And he goes, yeah, yeah, I'll have a beer. So we like ordered a couple of beers, and we were standing there talking. And a friend of mine who's another Pearl Jam super fan, comes up to me and in my ear goes, why are you bothering Danny Clinch? And I was like, oh shit, that's Danny. Oh, cool. I was like, hey. And he just said, yeah, I'm Danny. And I was like, wow, I'm embarrassed because I don't think I knew what you looked like. And he's like, yeah, that's kind of being behind the camera, like. And
Yeah.
Danny's pretty recognizable. And let's face it, he gets a lot of he gets a lot of camera time himself, and is so famous in his own right, but deservedly so. But I said, I'm so intrigued, like how you do this, and how you made a career out of doing this. And he said, yeah, it's just like live music was his thing. Like he had to be there. And so I found a kindred spirit in that regard. And obviously we both love photography. But I was kind of, I would say, shy about even mentioning that.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, I'm a photographer too, like, eh, yeah, I kind of am. But it's like, how do you even get started doing this? I said, man, I'd love to shoot these guys. And he's like, just tell them you want to shoot, reach out to somebody, and, in PR or in the office, or, people. He's like, just reach out and tell them you want to. He's like, well, what's the worst they can say? And to me, that was the best advice. I mean, that's the advice for anyone
Putting
who
yourself.
wants to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's the worst that can happen? They can say no. And I'm not a person who likes to, who doesn't, don't take no for an answer usually, when it comes to like, if it's something I know I can do, especially if something that I'm passionate about. So, um, he's given me so much great advice. I mean, on this last run, I think we were talking about it at Ohana. I said, any advice? And here I am like thinking like, is he bummed at me because I'm doing that? Like I don't know. You never really know what's going on in somebody's head. I know Danny pretty well, so I think I didn't really think he would be. But he said, first of all, congratulations. This is huge. And he's like, it's great, and you're going to do great. And he just told me to be artful, which I thought was like, I mean, I know what he was saying, and it's like, I'll make more or less of it than it is, but it's like it's the best advice I've ever gotten. And it's like this is and the Dark Matter tour especially is a traveling art show set to our favorite music,
Right.
played by our favorite guys. So it's I think about it every damn near every click of the shutter, I think.
Yeah. I bet.
It's like, well, how does that look? Does that, because sometimes you're documenting,
Hmm.
right? And that's the other thing is that, I mean, you've seen me at shows. I'm out there the whole time. I'm out there from before the guys walk on stage to the second they leave, and then I'm trying to get out of there, because I don't want to miss anything, and because there's things that are going to happen for sure. It's not formulaic. I mean, we know we don't have the same set list twice. Um, you want to capture that moment when something happens, and that's what I'm looking for. Is I'm looking for moments either between the guys or between the guys in the crowd, or just something that happens that's different, and trying to take advantage of all vantage points, not falling in love with only being on stage,
Right.
because I could see how people could. It's awesome. I mean, the energy, like it's so intense,
Yeah.
especially when you're between Boom and Matt, which is my favorite spot to sort of post up because there's a little screen there.
Yeah.
But you can feel the engine,
Right.
you know, and it's crazy. And you're
And then
watching
you
it, and it's like, oh, it's mind blowing.
and then you get caught like that one shot you have of Stone
Yeah.
walking in, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. He told me here in Chicago, actually, he said, I don't think you must be doing a great job because I don't think I've ever seen your face before. And I was like, well, that's weird because we've met, like, but that's a compliment too, in a way. And he said that, he goes, that's kind of a compliment, right? I said, yeah. I said, I'm always hiding behind this box, this
Doing a good
lens.
job of that. Yeah.
And yeah, and thank you. And he goes, now I'm going to look for you. And, so like every night I would see him and we'd like lock eyes and like, okay. And he's smiling, which is awesome, like,
Yeah. So you
yeah,
kind of,
it's,
oh, sorry, go ahead, finish. I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
it's just, it's crazy. I mean, it's like, it's, uh, I will remember this stretch of my life forever. It just is, it's such a blast. And it's just like, how cool to be part of it. I'm so grateful to be part of it. It's, it's crazy.
Yeah. You're living the
Um,
dream.
I am, and so yes, I mean that it was a chance. It was a chance encounter with Danny that sort
Yeah.
of inspired me to do it. He's like, if you want to do it, you just got to go do it.
Yeah.
Like, don't wait until you think you have the right gear, or until you. And I'm paraphrasing, but like, don't wait until you have permission. Certainly, like, what great photographs ever came out of permission? I mean, so few. So
Speaking of
yeah,
that,
yeah,
your stories or your pictures that have, you look at them and there's a story behind it. And
mm,
there's that one really amazing shot that you got of Glenn Hansard
oh,
backstage. And
oh yeah,
definitely a story in that. And I know that you
oh,
said, that you had to get permission, or felt like you needed to get permission to make sure he was okay with it. But
yeah, yeah.
tell me about that shot. I mean, you were backstage, and was everybody kind of chilling, and you just looked over and
Oh man. Well, it was the first. That was the first show out of Missoula.
right?
So there's a little break, and then we were there. And I remember I flew in the night before, and it was like, even at 11 o'clock at night, it was like 96 degrees or something. It was
Oh,
so hot. and that Ruoff, I think I'm saying it right, Music Center, whatever. I forget what it used to be called.
I'm not
I can
sure.
never think of it on, on cue. I can't think of almost anything because I'm not that bright. But it was blazing hot, and it's all outdoors, and it's this amphitheater that started, the stage is down here, and then it's really spreads out. And so I've got to also, like, I have responsibilities. I got to get the building shot. I've got to try to get the wide shot of everything. I got to get this. I got to get that. And Glenn went out and opened, and I have to say, I mean, first of all, he's become like a dear friend of mine um, through this last tour. I mean, I got to travel on their bus, from New York to Philly. I stayed a couple extra days here and there, shot him at the Beacon, which was an insane experience too.
That.
At the Fillmore in San Francisco. I mean, like all the buildings that I've never even shot in before. So a lot of it was new, but also just the guy and his band. And Garrett, the fiddle player, and God, just everyone, Joe, the bass player who's with him in the frames. And it's like these guys were such good guys. And I took lots of portraits of them at Wrigley. I took portraits of them at Fenway. I did lots of, one-off shows and stuff. I just kind of hung out with them. But he went out and opened. It was so gosh darn hot. And I can probably swear on this, right? I can be myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so fucking hot. It was insane. I mean, it was like I'm just standing there dripping sweat. I'm not the smallest dude in the world either, covered in black head to toe and sunbathing. And here's Glenn, who's like in jeans and like a long sleeve shirt and like an army shirt like this with the beard and the whole thing. I'm like, he's got to be just dying. And he went out on stage, and I think he still had time left or something. And he came off, and I don't know that it was because it was hot. I don't know what was going on necessarily, but I was walking around back there trying to find water, and I looked, and the rest of his band were all kind of hanging out here, and Glenn was just sitting on that road case, and that I think he's wearing an AC/DC shirt in that picture, and like we one of our first probably conversations was about how much we love AC/DC, and I had this little. If you follow me on Instagram, I had a little Weebon, figurine out at a lot of the shows, and my discipline is terrible, right? I wanted to do it at every show, but I kept forgetting, and I'm jumping around a little bit. But at some point, it wasn't that show. It was maybe two shows later or something. Somebody had given Glenn like a 12-inch Bon Scott figure, and I had this small one that I bought in Missoula, and I walked up to him and I said, well, I had Weebon in my hand, and I said, well, I can plainly see that yours is bigger than mine, but I'm sure that's not the first time you've heard that. And he lost it. Like he started cracking up, like we just had this great rapport, but yeah, it was a stolen moment. I just saw him sitting there, and he looked so like it might have just been that he was hot,
Yeah.
but he just really looked like he was like having a moment there. And so I took the picture, and then I didn't see him that night, but I saw him when we got to Chicago,
Mhm.
and he had a show, and we started chatting after the show, and it was like this great. He had a show at this really cool venue. Again, I don't remember the name of it. You might have been there, but then he had like an after show, which was at like this little bar that looked like it's been there probably since the 30s. It was like a house. It's a famous place too. I'm just not thinking. It's lack of sleep. And Josh O'Keefe came out with him, and all this stuff. And Glenn just kind of walked around. So we got to have a couple of beers. And I said, I have some pictures to show you from Indy and from Missoula. I got this great picture of you and Ed in Missoula. He's like, oh, I'd love to see him. You got to just text him to me. And I'm like, I don't, not comfortable with that. Like, it's like a lie. I guess a lot of people will be like, oh, okay, sure. Give me all your info. I'm like, I don't want your, I'll give him to your manager. And he's like, no, no, Jeff, just fucking text him to me. He's like, it's brilliant. It's magic that you shot that, I love it. And so then he and I are like texting for the rest of the tour. But I texted him that photo, and I said, I hesitate to even send this to you because I feel like I stole a private moment of yours. And he replied immediately. He's like, I love that. He goes, that's where the magic is, in the stolen moments.
Yeah.
And it just like, wow, you know, the wherewithal to know that. Well, I
Right.
mean, here's like, this guy is an Oscar, like he doesn't. he doesn't need more photographs of himself. And certainly he was more about like, let's get us all in here, let's get us together.
Right.
Don't forget to shoot Gareth. Gareth is he's so legendary, the fiddle
Aw.
player. And
Yeah.
it's just he's a lovely person. And save a story for next time. He almost kicked my college friend Jeff's ass in a bar in Philly. So I'll leave it
Okay.
there.
We'll save that for next time.
It's a good story. Yeah.
Oh, God.
I'd rather Glenn tell you the story because it's
Okay.
better coming from him.
Oh gosh. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad you all have developed that friendship, but that picture is just amazing. So,
I
hopefully
love
just,
it. It's on my wall at home. I love
yeah,
it that
I
much,
bet. It's so great. Well, speaking of, you know, earlier on, you were talking about the thinking about what you have to shoot and, what's coming up and that type of thing. And so I think about when the Pearl Jam tours or the legs of the tour are about to start. It's almost like a marathon for everybody who's involved. So it's like whatever your craft is, you're training up to get ready for this. So I'm
Hmm.
just curious, like, is there, in the photography world, is there anything you're doing to prep yourself for this leg that starts in April? I can't believe it.
No. Yes. And it is training. So one thing is like you got to make sure you got your gear together, like not just your camera stuff.
Mm.
So I bought a new lens since we wrapped in Sydney. So I came back to the US. I was in LA and I bought a lens at my favorite Leica shop down in LA. And I bought a 14 to 24 millimeter lens. So I can get really wide because I think that's some of what's missing. Sometimes the last next lowest one I had was a 24 to 90 millimeter. And so I'm able to get up close pretty quick, but it's also like 24 is pretty wide, and it's great for like street photography. But for concerts, especially in these big venues, like you want to be able to get all of it.
Yeah.
So extra investment in my gear bag, but you also want to make sure like you got the good shoes, like I'll wear um Blundstones a lot of the time because of just the support and they're comfortable and I've got them broken in. But I also, go the dad shoes vibe, throw on the New Balance or the Hokas. If I can hardly like usually on night two, my feet I'm shot,
Great.
because I'm 50 something, and 200 and something pounds. I'm then being generous to myself saying, 50 something and 200 pounds. I'm more than both of those things. And so like, so you want to make sure you're comfortable out there and ready. And yeah, I mean, I do have like a little bit of a routine that I walk a ton and row and hit the weights even though I don't look like it. And I do lots of these things to try and stay mobile because it's really very active. It's between probably 15,000 and almost 20,000 steps a night.
Wow.
And I never measured steps ever before. I just I had a Apple Watch, whatever they're called, on my wrist, and I was like, "Oh my God, that was
That's
just last night." And I'm like, "I don't have to do anything at all today."
yeah.
Um, I try to get my beer consumption regimen up as well because especially when it's hot, right afterwards, it's like what you want is like two beers, and then I can start to look at stuff and edit, and that's just me, not promoting alcohol at all. That's just my personal preference, but yeah, and stretching, stretching like before and afterwards, and like
Right.
also just trying to sleep. I mean, it's try to get rest. Probably to the casual or outside observer, it seems like, oh well, how hard is that? You work 2 hours a night, but it's like 12 hours.
Yeah. I'm
I
sure.
get to the venues usually around noon, and I'm not leaving there until 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning. So,
Gosh, that's
um,
a
so
long day. Yeah, so you definitely need
it's the best.
sleep.
You soak it up, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm sure. Every
Yeah,
minute.
yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna end with a couple of extra fun questions. Um, what is your favorite Pearl Jam song, or do you have a couple
Mm.
that you can share? When
Yeah, I
people
mean,
ask me, I have a hard time. I feel like I'm like there's always like my core like top three, but then I'm like, oh well, this kind of moved in because of what I'm going through, or
yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I'd say my go-tos have changed over the years, but I was at a time in my life when Vitalogy came out, that boy, I needed that record. I really did. And so almost anything on Vitalogy, like Immortality, I love. Um, Always been a great one. My friend who's here in Chicago, who's got a show tonight, I remember he figured out the chords to it and the lyrics in like an afternoon. I mean, that's what people who are actual musicians can do, and played it in my living room in Santa Monica. And I was like, how can you do that? And that's
Yeah.
not his vibe at all. Like, um, Love Immortality, Present Tense, I think I've mentioned before, um, is just so meaningful to me. And Nothing as It Seems always reminds me of my older son, our older boy, who's got a lot of medical challenges. And gosh, there's so many
Yeah.
off this record. Like I can't stop listening to this album.
Yeah.
I love Dark Matter. And so my 7-year-old's favorite song is Dark Matter, and he got to tell Jeff and Matt and Mike that randomly at Ohana.
I love it.
It's like telling them, I know they're like, why is there a child back here at like, midnight? I'm like, he's mine.
Oh, so
Um,
cute.
but yeah, and I Won't Tell. I love Won't Tell.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Um, there's so many, I mean, there's really like, I could say every song on that album has like become a favorite Pearl Jam song, and not just because I'm out there
Yeah.
on this tour. It's like the songs are so prolific and so reflective uh, of an entire life, and observing your own life,
Right.
and it's the kind of stuff that, like, if they wrote it when they were in their 20s, it wouldn't be nearly as meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
true.
So yeah, I mean, probably those. I mean, of course, I love the bangers too. I love the classics.
Right.
Anything that kind of gets you up. I mean, I love to still at this point love to hear and watch them play Lucan, just because I like, how do you keep up with that? Like, I can't keep up with it. I can't even like do it in the car when I'm driving. I know the words and I can't keep up with them. Like, how did he do that?
Right.
It's fucking
Maybe
amazing.
slow Lucan, but not the original.
Yeah, yeah. Well, somebody should ask him, like, could you want to do like a lounge version of Lucan? What would that even sound like? Um, but they're like, that's the coolest thing about Pearl Jam after 34, 35 years now almost, is that, there's literally like a song for every occasion
Right.
and whatever you're feeling or going through, and I think that's the thing that bonds us to their music, is that we've all gone through shit,
Yeah.
and clearly they have too, and
Yeah.
so it's humanizing, it's equalizing, it's just so important, man. Where would we be without music?
I
There's
know.
so many things going on in the world. You think, it's not a stretch that there's people who would like to have music not a part of this equation, or any of the things that we're into. And man, what a shit world it would be without music, and
Yeah.
without these guys, and without each other to go to shows to. And we lived it for a minute, right? During 2020 and
Yeah.
21. I was like, God, is this ever going to happen again?
I know.
And I think we all thought that.
Yeah.
And then
Thankfully,
I
we
thought to
have it all.
myself,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know, right? I
Yeah.
kept thinking to myself, like, am I just being selfish because I have this opportunity in front of me, and now I have to wait, you know? And so I'm like, come back. But it just, like, you're just so grateful for it. And I think that's reflected too on this record, and in all of us who love it so much. It's like, just so grateful to have another chance at it.
Yeah.
And so I try to bring that into what I do every night, is like, I want you to see that I'm grateful. I'm not waving my own banner going, look how cool I am. Like,
Right.
I don't think that at all. I'm thinking, like, this is so important to me because I get to document these guys that are in this thing that's meant so much to me. So
Yeah.
it's a huge honor, and it's awesome that people like you even want to talk to me.
Well,
So,
your work is amazing, and we're just, all the fans just love what you're doing. And if anybody
thank you.
has not seen Geoff's work, all you have to do is scroll through Pearl Jam's social media, and almost every shot is Geoff's work, and it's just amazing. We can't wait to see you on this next leg.
Oh,
Maybe
thanks.
down my way. You're in Miami.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I know you need to go. I have so many more things to ask you, but maybe for another time. And just thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Always happy to talk to you. I look forward to seeing you in Hollywood.
All right. Thanks,
All
Geoff.
right. All right,
Bye-bye.
Chrissy. Take care. Bye. Bye, everybody.